Hi, and welcome back to Subtractive Synthesis 101 with Sonic Academy. This is the second part of the oscillator videos. What we're going to do here is we're going to look at the control section on your oscillator and what all the controls do and how they function. Each synth you use is going to be a little bit different, but there's some basics that all or most of them are going to have. So we're going to concentrate on those. Now we're going to focus on Anna for the most part, and we're going to stick with the first oscillator section here, which is the virtual analog section. You've also got noise and attack oscillators on Anna, but they're quite specific to Anna. So we're going to leave those and start over on the left. Now, the first control we're going to look at is the voices. And what this will do is if I play, I've just got an initialized patch here with one single saw wave. Let's just check I'm playing Anna. Yeah. So we've got one single saw wave, and what the voices section does is it allows you to stack oscillators on top of each other. So here I've got 5 oscillators, and you can hear that's louder. And the reason it's louder is because all 5 oscillators are doing exactly the same thing. So just bear this in mind for a little bit later on. We're going to take this back down to 1, but the voices section just adds more oscillators of the same type on top of each other. The next control to look at is octave. That's fairly simple. So if I play a note here, I go up an octave, or you can go down an octave. And Anna lets you choose up or down 3 octaves. So that's very high. The next control down is semitone. So that's going to go up or down 1 semitone at a time. Now, in isolation, that's not particularly useful because it means that your oscillator is going to be out of tune. But what I'll do here is I'll pick a second oscillator of the same type. So we've got another saw wave. Remember the voicing section, I have to give it one voice for it to do anything. Now at the moment, they're both set to play the same note. So you're only hearing one note slightly louder. But if I swap oscillator 2, if I push this up 7 semitones, which is a fifth, an interval of a fifth, all of a sudden you're playing a chord. A fifth is probably one of the most common intervals to use that isn't an octave, because it's musically most relevant for most keys. I'm not going to get into theory because I forgot everything I knew 15 years ago. So the semitone function is most useful for detuning 2 oscillators off against each other to create a chord. I mean, for example, if I had a third oscillator adding a voice, and if I push this up 3 semitones, you've then got a minor chord. And then if I push this up another semitone, a major chord. But this is not what this video is about, so let's stop doing that. Okay, switch off these other 2 oscillators for now. And put this back down to normal. That's it. Right, the next control is fine tuning. Now fine tuning, a lot of the time will allow you to fine tune up or down either half a semitone or a full semitone. A full semitone is going to be, I think it's 100 cents, but that's not what's displayed on Anna. So if I hold the note down and I adjust this, you can hear what it does. Come on. So it makes it drunk. Now that's useful. Again, it's useful for detuning oscillators against each other, but in a much more subtle way. And what it does, if you don't use a musical interval as your fine tuning between 2 oscillators, it kind of thickens. It's a detuning. It thickens up the sound. So let's just show that. Let's switch oscillator 2 back on. Oh, my mouse doesn't want to play today. Right, let's detune oscillator up a little bit. Come on, mouse. And oscillator 2 will detune down a little bit. And there you've got that classic kind of detuned rave or almost like a Hoover sound. Okay, let's switch back to our initialized preset. So we've just got one oscillator again. Right, the next really obvious control is volume. So if you remember back to the diagrams I did of the signal flow, where you had two oscillators against each other, there was a mixer section. Well, this is part of that mixer section. So you could have two oscillators. If I choose another oscillator type for oscillator 2 this time, if I create a pulse oscillator and give it one voice, you can use the volume controls to blend them against each other so that you can start, this is the kind of initial part of sound design. That becomes more useful if you drop the pulse wave down an octave. So you can hear what's happening there. You're blending or mixing oscillator types. Right, let's initialize again. And what we'll do this time is we'll have a look at the detune knob. Detune knobs are very common these days. To use detune, this is where we have to start stacking voices against each other. So let's give it the full whack. 8 voices in Anna. Now what we can do is we'll use the detune knob to, going back to this fine tune, it finely detunes oscillators against each other, and you'll hear what that does as I turn this dial up. Let's just turn the volume down, because remember we've added 8 voices, so it gets a lot louder. So the more you do this, the kind of more dissonant it sounds. Now, what's closely related to this detune knob is something called a retrigger. Now, not all synths have this, but what it means is it tells the synth to either start the oscillator at the beginning of each phase or allow the oscillators to run freely. And I think what I'll do is I'll just fire up Serum to kind of graphically illustrate this. Where are we? Down here. So let's load up Serum. Now Serum starts off with a nice saw wave, which is quite useful. But this oscillator phase, if you see the line going from left to right, this is the point at which the oscillator fires, or starts if you like. So if I start it here, this is where the oscillator will start. If I pull the phase back, it will start here this time. Now if you have retrigger switched on, the oscillator is going to start, say for example, at this point every single time you hit a note. So going back to Anna, what you can hear is as I detune, you can hear the same kind of phasing effect as each oscillator starts on top of each other. Now if I switch retrigger off, you'll hear the oscillators running freely against each other. It's a much smoother sound. So let me switch this off now. And you can hear movement in the background there. So retrigger is quite useful. If you have retrigger on, it can be useful for things like psytrance basses, where you want the same kind of click at the start of each bass sound. And if you turn retrigger off, where the oscillators are running freely against each other, that's more useful for pad sounds, where you just want them evolving and smooth in the background. Now one control that Anna has that most synths don't is the detune shape. Some of them do, but this is quite rare. And what this does is it changes the detune algorithm. It changes the way that the detune is working. So let's just listen to that briefly. So it's kind of a tighter detune over this side and much more extreme over onto the right. So you probably want to play with that within Anna, but you won't find that control on many other synths. I think there's something like that on the JP8080, you know, the really old Roland virtual analog ones, the ones that started that proper trance sound in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. So the next control is width. Now, if I take the voices back down to 1, and detune is irrelevant when you've only got one voice because you can't detune the oscillator against itself. If I turn the width up, nothing happens because there's only one oscillator. Now if we add all these oscillators together again, and then I turn the width up, because we've got some detune here, as you add width, it's doing the obvious. It's making the sound a lot wider, so that the voices that are stacked together are moved apart in the stereo field. And I think, from memory, Serum allows you to visualize that. So if I turn unison is the same as adding voices, you can see in the GUI here how many voices you're adding together, and you can see with a detune how much they're detuned against each other as well. I'm not sure if you can, no, I don't think you can see the stereo width. But you get the idea. You can see that there's voices being detuned against each other. Right, let's go back to Anna. Next control is a pretty obvious one. It's pan, so it's whether your signal's left or right. And all your synths are going to give you a panning knob per oscillator, or at least they should do. And the last one, again, not all synths will have this control in the oscillator section, but a lot of them do. And all this one is doing is it's telling the oscillator which filter to route to. Massive does this as well. So over on the left, the oscillator is going completely to filter 1, and over on the right, it's going completely to filter 2. And in Anna's case, you can blend anything in between as well. One other control that Anna's got is key tracking. If you switch key tracking off, all the notes are going to play the same note, which is, I don't know why you'd use that, but it's there. Perhaps if you're creating a percussive sound and you want it to be the same pitch all the way along. But for the most part, you want to leave key tracking on all the time. So they're the basic controls. There's not a lot else that you would need for your basic sound design. Most synths are going to have a variation on these. They'll certainly have all the pitch controls, usually octave, semitone, and fine. Any synth that allows you to stack oscillators is going to have a voicing, or sometimes it's called unison, as you saw in Serum. Volume, detune, again, if you've got voices stacking, you can detune them. And if you have got a detune function, you really will find the width dial useful. And then the panning. So they're your basic controls. And what we will do in the next video is we'll start looking at what happens to the signal after it leaves the oscillator and passes on to the filter. I'll see you then.